When the unexpected happens at mediation, Crazy Stories Part 1, part of the series Mediating with or Without Attorneys with Tye Bourdony. This is our topic for today.
Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast by InstantMediations.com, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube, the Instant Mediations app, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact-dependent.
Hello and welcome. I am Natalia Łowska-Czajka, advocate, mediator, and arbitrator from Warsaw, Poland.
Hi, it's Mac Louis, attorney, mediator, and arbitrator working throughout Florida and Texas.
And I'm Tye Bourdony, full-time professional mediator and primary mediation trainer in Central Florida, Orlando.
So after having been through some of the podcasts already, we decided to share some stories that are really about what can be unexpected and happen suddenly in mediation and how we deal with that. And the subtitle for that, we decided to be Crazy Stories Part 1. Please be with us and hear what we've experienced ourselves and how a skilled mediator can help you go through the unexpected. Tye, the floor is yours.
So here I am. I'm sorry for laughing off that, but I'm trying to think, okay, how crazy of a story do I tell? And I thought to myself, okay, I'm not going to tell the crazy stories. But I think the point of the matter is that unexpected things will happen in mediation all of the time. And you will hear just off the wall, weird comments. People tend to really begin to trust and make a connection with their mediator. And so they'll tell them all manner of things. And so I know there's a couple of points to kind of get through, but some of the toughest, weirdest things, like I've been asked, for instance, to tell, one party that the child in question isn't theirs, right? That is not easy. That is rather tough, and then just other things that have happened, like with body parts. And I'm not trying to be weird, but just that take everybody in the room back. I know that sounds crazy, but the point is, people will tell you weird, crazy things. But where then does that? What's the point, right? And so the first one is, this is very personal, very important, toughest times in people's lives, right? When we see them. And so one of the things that I do see, often enough is someone just cannot move off of a position, or they just can't move on, right? And it keeps the mediation at a standstill for one reason, or another. And particularly what I'm thinking about is, and again, this was a fairly recent case, but I've seen this again and again. In mediation, somebody just wants to move on. And so they're willing to give up a lot, right? If they can come to agreement and we can move on. And what normally you would think a party would say, yes, okay, let's do that, because that makes good sense. They won't do it. And why? Why is it? Sometimes it's because that's all they have left with this individual, and they just. So my mediation skills, I think I'm a good mediator, but they don't work well at home. Why? Because I'm emotionally vested, and I can't see rationally. So these folks, this is the toughest time in their life, and one of them doesn't want to move on, or they just can't see through the argument sometimes, and they stay positional. And what do you do? What do you do when they stay positional?
Yeah, so this is a good topic for both mediators and parties, right?
Yes.
For the mediators, because it needs to remind us of the fact that people are people, they're human, and they're emotional creatures. And so when a person can't move on, or they have a difficult time seeing or imagining how things could be different if they were, quote unquote, to move on, we have to take it upon ourselves to make sure that we're skilled, that we understand human psychology, and we understand a little bit of human nature so that we can then appropriately address the topic. But it's also a good topic for the pro se people or people without lawyers or people who have lawyers, whoever they are, the parties out there need to remember that every mediation is different. Okay.
Yeah.
Every mediation is going to contain things that are very personal.
Yeah.
And some mediations may contain things where you're just arguing over, I don't know,
Right.
$50 or whatever. It's not a big of a deal. But a lot of mediations, especially the mediations that we tend to do, which focus on family law, divorces and custody cases, we're dealing with, like I like to say, people's sex lives, their money, and their children. You
Yeah.
can't get more personal than that, right?
That's right.
And then throw in property in there too. And so I think a lot of the experiences that we've had where we say, wow, look at that. There was a crazy story that I went through. It involves mediations that dealt with people's personal lives.
Yeah.
So to the parties out there who might be going to a mediation, or you're planning on attending one, or you're wondering if it might be good for you, just know that when you go to mediation, trust a mediator to lead you to break through the process. Don't become stuck or pigeonholed or cornered in a position that you may not be seeing completely rationally. Okay. And so that's just why I wanted to stay on that, because that definitely has been what I've considered, quote unquote, crazy stories when people come in and they don't know how to move on. I'll give one example. I've had a situation where a party they're going through a divorce, but they are given so much on paper and they're offered much to move on, but for whatever reason, they don't want to. They want to, in fact, one person is actually impressed that they don't want the divorce at all. Well, in our state and in many other states around the world, it's kind of not your choice. It takes two people to get into a marriage, but it takes one to exit and to end it. But if a person is stuck there and they say, look, I don't want the divorce at all, that does start tying the mediator's hands to a degree as to what other solutions might there be. Okay, I mean, you can't force people to come into an agreement. But I'm just letting you know that this has come up quite a bit, the whole moving on thing.
And please let me add, because Tye was talking about what it is in terms of how it can verbally be that you as a mediator need to accommodate people's sometimes very intimate things that are being passed on the other party. Yeah. Sometimes really things that are life-breaking and actually very, very emotional, very intimate. Mark was saying about the general rule that people behave this or the other way. I wanted to tell a story about thing that was being done and was a real breakthrough in mediation. There was a couple and was doing the division of their property. And there was a lot, and it was somewhere going to wrap up suddenly, but there was one important item. Actually, it was a set of items because it was like a pottery collection. And each of the spouses wanted to have this very pottery collection, and it couldn't move either way. Everybody wanted it. It seemed like the wife possessed it. So they really already divided multi-million properties, and now they're stuck with this pottery collection. And what's really happened, the lady, to the next mediation session, the lady brought this pottery collection, and what she did, she just put it on the table, meaning there was a box, the pottery went all down into pieces. But the problem was solved because there wasn't this pottery collection any longer, and they settled on what they have. So sometimes really in mediation, an unexpected thing can happen, things that you don't really foresee when you want it to. And that is also a story about how sometimes you need to let things go, especially if these are material things.
Yeah.
To move on in life, you really need to close certain chapters, and especially being tied to material possessions might really be stopping you from developing yourself spiritually, developing your other skills, taking up your proper obligation towards the kids. So really,
Yeah.
sometimes we need to think through, and as mediators, we need to see this proper perspective and also give it to the parties so that they can first be secure in the mediation, but also think about what we are doing in a really longer perspective than just what we are agreeing on now.
In Tye, so when we come to another thing that is unexpected at mediations, what happens when a party adds something else in the mediation agreement in the last minute?
Yeah.
What has you experienced, Ben?
Yeah. I want to say really fast on what you just said, Natalia, before I kind of go on to that, and because in a way of course they're related as well. But I had a mediation that we came to everything, and there was a rolled up chain link fence in the back part of the property, and neither one would give it to the other. We had done everything else. This was a rolled up, it had been there for like more than a year or so, as I recall. It has no monetary value. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because sometimes it's not about the pottery. It's not about the chain link fence. It's about that's all they know is the argument, or one of them doesn't want to move on, or they can't move on. And so while we can see what's going on and we can recognize, the parties can't. They're vested. They are stuck sometimes. And so sometimes our role is to, let's be honest, sometimes we're not just mediators, we're therapists, right? You have to notch up and dial up your emotional intelligence oftentimes. But can you get them to move on? Sometimes you can't. And so I'll tell you that we're getting a little feedback. Is that so? What happens when something comes up at the last minute? Well, that chain link fence, as I recall, that came up at the last minute. When something comes up at the last minute, and it happens, you've got to stop, because what you don't want to do is lose all the good work that you've done. And so you have to address that issue as best you can. And so one of the ways that I found to address that issue is there language that can be binding on both of the parties with respect to, like, just reframe it in a different way, right? And so sometimes I'm able to get them to move on because with the thing that they're asking for, the perspective I'll put it in is, okay, so if either party should encounter X, Y, or Z, they would agree that this is what they will do, rather than, because usually it's one person wanting to stick the other with something that happens. So, but at the end, everybody is ready to move on. And so the question is, how do you get this issue addressed and still have the rest of the issue? You can always reserve on that issue, right? Let the court decide. You reality check, right? And that is, well, what's the cost benefit analysis? Do we stick on this, lose everything, and or do we come back at another time? The problem is if you don't sign the agreement, then people get buyer's remorse. They come back, and there's no agreement sometimes, right? So it's a delicate situation. When it comes up, you have to address it as best you can in a way that everybody can agree and move on. And it's case by case.
And on top of that, what can also be unexpected in mediation is some weird, and I'm sorry to say, behavior, or some weird acts that are aimed at intimidating the other party. I do believe that some of the people, some of our parties who come to mediation might be frightened about those things. And let me tell you what I mean. For example, a husband coming to mediation and bringing a girlfriend that the wife was unaware of at this very moment. So things become clear. The lady ends up in tears, or someone who actually suddenly tries to behave in a weird way. And again, it's all down to mediator skills, because the mediator is the one who makes the parties feel safe in the environment. What we need to know about mediation is that nobody else who is not invited is not coming to the mediation room. So any girlfriends or grandmothers or anybody else who is coming
Children.
to mediation is not going to be there. So even if suddenly you become frightened that there is someone else, don't worry. The mediator will handle this for you. And actually, in a way, I can say that we as mediators are prepared for the unexpected.
To a degree. Sometimes
To a degree.
things even shock or surprise us.
Yes.
But Tye, could you add to that about what happens when something unexpected does come up, especially as it relates to, the situation where somebody brings in the new girlfriend, the new boyfriend, or what happened the other day with me, where somebody disclosed that there's another kid that nobody knew about. So
Yeah.
could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think you guys are kind of hitting the head on the nail generally. Point is, yes, we know that happens, right? And we're prepared for that, but you just never know what somebody is going to say, right? And so then the question becomes, how best can you move forward? You have to do so in a emotionally intelligent manner. You have to be careful with their feelings, and you have to, while still trying to move them along. The one thing I will say, a mediator has to know when to react and when not to react, right? You have to be able to keep a poker face at the appropriate times, right? Especially if you're in front of both parties. But that's the nature of the unexpected, is it's unexpected. And so, but we know that that's going to happen. And so the question is, though, is it too crazy? Is that a time for a break? Should we now be in caucus? But the point is, you address it as best as you can, and you try and help the parties move forward, and you do it by reality checking. You do it by being empathetic. You do it by listening, right? And because sometimes when someone understands that, I hear you, I know that really was tough for you, they need to get that back before you can then help them see what the future positive outcome is and how to move forward. But sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes they're not going to get off of that position, and then, well, now what do we do? And then we have to start thinking, well, all right, what options are there? These are what the options are. I can reserve on this issue for you. We can come back, how best. And that's nice when you have attorneys sometimes. Then the parties can kind of go back and forth, but it's case by case. And the more this happens to a mediator, the better the mediator is. But there's some things you just can't anticipate. I mean, cases can have very similar instances, right? Very similar sets of circumstances, but it's people that will make them very unique, because people have a funny way of making things just unique, to put it nicely, and we have to try and help them move on. Sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't.
Yes, and finally, Tye, what about this unexpected thing, which is when someone is unsure of how to proceed? What would be your take on that?
Right. So there's a couple of things that are warning signs, right? I'm a big geek, right? So my spider sense goes off certain times. If someone says to me, I'm feeling pressured, or I don't know how best to move on in this regard, so I'm going to let them know you can always speak with an attorney. I'm going to probably, if we're not already in caucus, I'm going to caucus, right? I want them to let them know that that I hear them, that I'm there with them. I want them to talk about the issue. And sometimes you get through, and sometimes you can't get through to them, right? It's case by case. But if they trust you, they then will trust the process. And sometimes you can help them move forward. but it's typically case by case. And in that moment, then you have to, again, just like before, you have to give them the best options in front of them based on your experience. And how can you make it? And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And once in a while, if that results in impasse, I think a mediator has to become comfortable understanding every mediation can't result in an agreement. And sometimes the best thing is for the parties to not come to agreement, as crazy as that sounds, right? Sometimes it sets the stage, the parties know where they're at, any miscommunication has been, hopefully dealt with, but they understand where they're at and then they can move forward. Sometimes agreement comes after mediation. Sometimes they need to go in front of the judge, case by case, but we have to also know when not to push.
Thank you so much for that. And having said all of that, that would be it from us today with our When the Unexpected Happens at Mediation podcast episode. We hope to have you on our part 2 on the same topic. And we are signing off. Natalia Łowska-Czajka.
And Mac Pioli.
And Tye Bourdony.